I'm Anthony Head. For the past few years, I've had a fantastic time playing the part of Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, you might think that I would know all there is to know about the supernatural. Well, I'm no expert, I'm just an actor. However, I have become intrigued about the root, the origins of these supernatural tales. And I'd like to know more. And so begins my journey into the heart of darkness. In this film, I'm going to find out the real truth behind one of folklore's deadliest creatures, the vampire. Gothic glamour. It's no wonder that vampires are so much a part of the popular imagination. Decadent, immoral sexuality. It's just a lot of fun. Halloween for grown-ups. Then I saw a news report from a journalist in Romania. It made me realise that there's more to the vampire story than just a bit of fun. In fact, it's really rather frightening.
The people dug up a dead relative because they say he had turned into a vampire and was sucking their blood while they slept. For details of this really shocking story, we hear now from our local reporter in Craiova, Lucian Dindirica. Good evening, Lucian.
Good evening, Magda, ladies and gentlemen. A few days after he was buried, Petre Toma, who died last year, aged 76, is said by his relatives to have turned into a vampire and came at night to suck their blood. The people say that they had become so weak they could hardly move, so they decided to dig him up. Together with some friends, the dead man's brother-in-law broke into the crypt armed with knives, chisels and sickles and broke into the coffin of Petre Toma. His hands were down by his body and there was blood all around the mouth.
With a normal death, the heart dies. Blood can't keep flowing after 2 weeks, unless the person is a vampire. So he was dug up and they proceeded just like in the tales of vampires.
We removed his heart, burned it at the crossroad, mixed the ashes in the water and drank it, the whole family.
Neither the state prosecutors nor the police forensic team can express their horror at what they have seen. The dead man's brother-in-law has been accused of desecrating the grave and now faces prison. Criminal proceedings have been started against 6 people for desecration of a grave.
Look, this is the pitchfork I used. Film it. Were they right to take out his heart?
Dear me, yes. Otherwise many people would have died. Some people say it's a lie, but these are hard facts.
Do vampires exist?
They exist, yes, and they were right to take his heart out because that would stop him harming others.
If his heart hadn't been removed, what would have happened?
The sick people would have died. Those people that got sick.
All that happened only weeks ago, in the heart of 21st century Europe. Clearly, for many people, vampires are all around us. So where does this fierce belief of vampires come from? I'm going to find out. Thank you. If you're anything like me, probably just about everything you know about vampires comes from the movies. Can I get some popcorn? The cinema has really made the career of one vampire above all others.
I am Dracula. Ever since Bela Lugosi sank his fangs into Helen Chandler's lovely neck in 1931, Dracula has become a horror movie staple. In fact, Dracula is the most famous vampire to have ever lived.
Dracula the terrifying, the feared, who sleeps in the tombs of the dead by day and arises at night to inflict his terror upon the innocent.
There have been hundreds of vampire movies since then, starring everyone from Christopher Lee to Gary Oldman. Of course, there was a Dracula before Bela Lugosi, and vampires before Dracula. So if we want to go deeper into the Dracula story, apparently all roads lead here. It's the home of Dr. Tina Ruth, who's an expert in vampire fiction and a member of the Dracula Society. Dr. Tina Ruth.
Yes, come in.
How do you do? Thank you.
And this is my study.
I guess I know what you study.
Vampires. The vampire in popular fiction.
Where does the popular image of Dracula come from?
When we talk about vampires today, we're mostly talking about Stoker's creation. It was mostly ripping yarn, an adventure story, but it also tapped into very deep instincts in us. It's death and sex and blood, which is what Dracula is.
So was Dracula the first fictional vampire?
No, the first fictional vampire in English was probably The Vampire by Dr. John William Polidori. It was written as part of a game which took place at the Villa Diodati.
They screwed up their eyes against the heart.
A group of friends were terrifying each other with ghost stories. One of the friends, Mary Shelley, came up with an almost perfectly formed Frankenstein.
They ever saw of the monster.
Excellent, Mary.
The poet Lord Byron's story was rather disappointing. But Polidori must have jotted down some notes, which he later developed after they'd parted company under not the best of circumstances, into The Vampire, which is based very heavily on Lord Byron. It gave us the world's first aristocratic vampire and established the conventions for the next century.
Apart from Polidori's Vampire, what else inspired Bram Stoker to create Dracula?
He took holidays in Whitby with his family. And Whitby is a very strange, very romantic place. It's crowned by the Abbey ruins, which is surrounded by a churchyard, and the graves are being eaten away by the sea. The whole feel of Whitby is quite eerie.
Whitby sounds like the ideal setting for a horrific tale. Was there an inspiration for the story?
Yes, the event which seems to have unlocked his imagination was a very vivid dream he had on the 7th of March. He said it was due to eating dressed crab before he went to bed, but it certainly seemed to have affected him. This nightmare introduced him into a fluid world where sexuality could take unusual forms, where men could claim ownership in men and women could kiss each other.
These girls. One tries to kiss him. Blood on lips and throat.
In the dream world, he entered something beyond the repressive gender roles of Victorian society, and where everything was turned upside down, inside out, and could create a monster.
The Count appears. Interferes. Rage and fury. Diabolical. This man belongs to me. I want him. No!
It was a nightmare which could give birth to the monster that was Dracula.
And what gave him the name Dracula?
Now, he did some research in the British Museum and he came across an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. And he found in that one a very interesting name.
Vovod, also named Dracula. So, Dracula was a real person?
His name was Vlad, and another nickname was Tepesh. Vlad Tepesh.
So if the name of Dracula was based on a real person, was that person, Vlad Tepesh, a vampire? It's a question I need to find the answer to. Hopefully I'll find it in the Carpathian Mountains in Transylvania, the traditional home of the vampire. This is Bucharest, capital of Romania, a place half modern, half steeped in medieval tradition. In my mind, no country in the world is more closely identified with a vampire, and I'm heading for the creature's heartland, Transylvania, I think. Are we here? No idea. I have no idea either. Driving through Romania, it doesn't take much imagination to picture the country as it might have been centuries ago. Out here in the countryside, little has changed. In this dramatic, unfamiliar landscape, a belief in dark forces seems somehow less surprising. I'm aiming for this place here, Buenari. It's a castle, ruined castle that's believed to have been built by the infamous Wallachian king that Stoker read about in Whitby, Vlad Tepesh. Question for me is, he may have influenced the imagination of Bram Stoker, but was he the first vampire? With a little luck, I'll find out. Before nightfall. Now I'm here in these dramatic, brooding mountains. I'm finding that Stoker's story is coming to life in my hands. Especially the bit where Stoker's central character, Jonathan Harker, describes a journey to meet the Count that feels so similar to my own.
I had made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with a nobleman of that country. I find that the district is in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own Ordnance Survey maps. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. I must ask the Count all about them.
That's where I'm heading. The castle of Vlad Tepesh, where I hope to find a connection between Vlad and the vampire myth.
Yes, Anthony. You are actually redoing what Vlad did with
Nicolae Paduraru is head of the Transylvanian Society of Dracula in Romania, and he's one of the world's foremost vampire experts.
Stones and bricks to repair the fog truss up there.
I want to know from Nicolae how Vlad came by his name.
You know it by Vlad Tepesh? Tepesh? Tepa means steak. This is the nickname given to him by the Turks. The Turks were terrified when they had to fight Vlad, because Vlad would impale the prisoners. And for the Turk, impalement is not only a bloody torture, it's a humiliation, because it turns a man into a woman.
Can you tell me the process of impalement, how he tortured his victims and killed them?
The victim is on the ground, flat, legs apart. The stake is also on the ground, fixed. With the stake kept firm, the body gets impaled slowly, and if you want that person to suffer, then you would conduct the advance of the stake through the body parts in a way to avoid the vital organs. After this is being done, the stake would therefore get up in the back here. It was, if you like, a lesson. Beware of me. I'm Vlad, the impaler. This is what is waiting for you.
So Vlad wasn't a vampire?
Well, he had many enemies, but none of them said that he ever drank blood or that he indulged in vampiric practices.
So how do the names Bram Stoker and Vlad the Impaler connect?
We know exactly. He read a booklet called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldova, written by the British consul in Bucharest called William Wilkinson. And for short, it's half a page. In Wallachia ruled a prince called Dracula. Dracula had battles with the Turks and lost. He was replaced by his younger brother. In Romanian, Dracula means devil. This is the famous sentence which made Stoker said, I'll take the word Dracula for my vampire count.
So Vlad wasn't a vampire, it was just a concoction of the Stokers?
Bram Stoker did two things. Did a great service to the Romanian tourism and did a great disservice to the Romanian history at the same time, because everyone confuses the historical Dracula with the vampire count. But one is a historical category, the other is a supernatural category, and you cannot just confuse them. History and supernatural are two different things.
History and the supernatural are two different things. It's best I keep reminding myself of that. There's an atmosphere here. I can almost imagine it all taking place right here, 6 centuries ago. These mountain slopes are forests not of trees, but of impaled men. Wow. Oh my God. Castle Dracula at last. It's a staggering location. A fantastic defensive position for a prince who had little trouble making enemies. If these walls could talk, what horror they've witnessed. It's empty now, and there's little evidence left of its bloody history. It's silent. No birds singing here. Oh, what a wind, what a wind. So this is the home of the man of many names, Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, and also I now know Dracula, the name Bram Stoker chose for the world's most famous fictional vampire. That's one element of the story uncovered. But there must be more, because however cruel and sadistic Vlad may have been, he never rose from the dead or drank his victims' blood. Tonight I've been invited to one of the traditional festivals that are held in these mountain villages. Even today, events like these are treasured. A chance for villagers to gather together and swap stories. It's the way local history is preserved. And tonight I've heard a particularly compelling bit of history. It's the true story of another historical figure who came a century after Dracula. A story that may better explain the bloodlust and sexually charged eternal life that is such a vital part of the vampire tradition. It's the story of a noblewoman born into a powerful dynasty who ruled an area across the mountains from here. Her life story is so gruesome that she's remembered simply as the Blood Countess. In 1604, Countess Elizabeth Bathory, at the age of 40, took control of her family estates after her husband died in battle and quickly built a reputation for being a harsh employer. She employed young women of local villages as servants, and they lived in constant fear of her anger. Any mistakes, however minor, were brutally punished. But punishment turned to ritual killing when one night Bathory's assault drew blood. The sight of her maidservant's blood produced in her a macabre conviction that the blood of virgins would rejuvenate her fading beauty. She wasted no time. She ordered her manservant Therko and majordomo Janos Urivaria to slit the girl's throat. For the first time, Bathory felt the warmth of a virgin's blood on her face, and she was instantly hooked. Now she would live for eternity, if only the supply could be maintained. And for the next 6 years, it was. Bathory's reign of terror lasted for 6 years, until she was arrested and put on trial on December the 29th, 1610. I'm told that she left a diary, which still exists, in which she documented killing 612 women. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in her own dungeons, and there she remained, bricked up, until she died, unrepentant, and still beautiful 4 years later. So, there was a real Dracula, who really did come from Transylvania. He was a brutal sadist, but bloodsucker he was not. There was also a Blood Countess, a psychopath in search of eternal youth, who bathed in the blood of slaughtered virgins, but she was not of the living dead. I'm still missing parts of the jigsaw, an explanation for the blood drinking and the rising from the grave with fangs and talons. Just listen to this. It's from Dracula. Van Helsing, the vampire hunter, is explaining how vampires tick. The Nosferatu do not die like the bee when he stings once. He is only stronger, and being stronger have yet more power to work evil. The Nosferatu? So I turn to my trusty Encyclopedia of the Undead. No self-respecting vampire hunters without one of these. Nosferatu is a modern word derived from the Greek nosophoros, a plague carrier. So could this be a clue? Could vampires be connected to the plagues that periodically swept across medieval Europe? I feel that the secrets of the vampire are about to be revealed. I've returned to Bucharest. If there is a connection between vampires and the plague, the scourge of medieval Europe, there's a good chance of finding it here, in the Institute of Medicine. So far I've discovered how the world's most famous vampire got his name. I know something about real historical figures who have fed into the vampire story, but I've yet to discover why a belief in vampires is so widespread. Not just here, but across the whole of Europe. These documents are English translations of an original account of a vampire slaying, and they begin with the plague. Dating from 1738, it's been written by an official of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and is apparently the first ever mention of the actual word, vampire. This report created such a stir that every court in Europe demanded a copy. It tells the story of a Serbian peasant called Peter Plogojewicz, who died in 1725. Report by the Imperial Provisor, Gradisk district. A subject in the village of Koslova by the name of Peter Plogojewicz was ailing and grew mortally sick of the plague. 10 weeks later, 9 further people, young and old, died. But before they did so, they claimed that the aforementioned Peter Plogojewicz had risen from his grave and come to them in their sleep and drawn the life from them in order to regain his own. And they said that since such people, whom they called vampires, have a body undecomposed with skin, hair and nails growing, the subjects unanimously resolved to open the grave of Plogojewicz to see if such signs were upon him. Since I could not hold such people from the resolution they had made, either with good words or threats, I agreed to view the exhumation. The face, hands and feet, and the whole body were so constituted that they could not have been more complete in his lifetime. After I had seen this spectacle, while the people grew more outraged than distressed, all the subjects, with great speed, sharpened a stake in order to pierce the corpse of the deceased with it, and put this at his heart. Whereupon, as he was pierced, not only did much blood completely fresh flow through his ears and mouth, but still other wild signs upon his private part took place. Nosferatu, the plague carrier, is destroyed. Now, these were superstitious times, and I doubt people had much idea of what happens when a body decays. Could what they saw in those reopened graves have pushed them towards a belief in vampires? I can't put it off any longer. I'm going to have to see for myself exactly what happens when a body decays, and see just how much substance there is in my theory that the image of vampires comes from a very human horror of decomposing bodies. I've come to meet pathologist Mark Benecki.
Have you seen a dead body before?
No.
No. Not your grandparents or something?
No.
No. All right. Usually they pack them here because sometimes there are liquids leaking out or something, but
nice.
This is not the case.
Nice.
They're not looking too bad here, so they're relatively fresh.
Jesus.
When you put a person in a grave, like this person, and you know this person is a few days old maybe, and then you take it out of the grave. It's relatively cold down there in the soil maybe, and then you dig it up and open the grave, and then it looks as if it was not much decomposed because everything is in its place. You know, the arm is there, the breasts are there, the head is there, nothing is falling off like in a monster movie or in a horror movie or in a zombie movie.
How old is this?
Maybe just a few days. Because usually when they get older, you start to see more of a greenish discoloration over here. But this could also be a start of decomposition, which is also a vampire sign, because if pressure builds up in the body, then sometimes it can push out red liquid, putrefaction liquid, and then it looks as if you were drinking blood. You know,
Putrefaction liquid?
Yeah, it can be reddish. I mean, there is blood inside the putrefaction liquid, but also other things. Sometimes you see fly eggs, which can make it look quite alive, but no, they're not here.
Whoa.
Yeah, you got a whiff again or what?
No, just the thought of fly eggs behind, you know, lodging behind the ears is
Jolly thought.
Yeah. Well, you know, it happens to us all, so it makes us all the same.
I think that was probably my problem. Mark's slides of bodily decay made things all too horribly clear. Natural decay could easily be mistaken for supernatural phenomenon.
That's one of the typical vampire signs. Teeth just look very much like long teeth. I mean, this is a bad oral hygiene, and then the skin starts to dry off here, and you see a sharp tooth protruding here. This is about reddish liquid coming out of the mouth and out of the nose, because it's bloated decay again, and then it's pressing out the liquid, and you see it flowing.
Nice.
The easiest explanation is to say he's that fat because he drank the blood. When it comes to superstition, you observe the right things, but you just interpret them wrongly because you already have a mindset. In this case, it's maybe too powerful. The superstition is too powerful, and you don't just see the rational anymore.
I'm coming to realize just how important the power of belief is for people here. How intensely they feel linked to death and the afterlife. Death and decay must be explained somehow. It's a very human need. And for many people without a scientific background, an explanation based on traditional beliefs is all they have. And the power of belief is evident everywhere here.
You have to understand Romania as being mainly a rural country. Although we are living at the beginning of the third millennium, in the Romanian rural area we can still talk about tradition and about traditional society, which is very important. We can still talk about returning soul into the living death, into the vampire who is somewhere hanging in between worlds. Once you believe in the soul and in the presence of the soul into the house and into the family, into the community, of course you believe in some sort of physical manifestation of this soul whenever it is not satisfied.
About everything I've learned is, well, merci. A lot can be explained by history, by the culture of a place, by science. And yet, in spite of all that, there are still many people who believe in vampires today. And not just in a little Romanian village, but in the capital cities of the world. You wouldn't expect a modern, busy city like London to be big on vampires. But you'd be wrong. Between 1967 and 1984, Highgate Cemetery was the centre of a vampire epidemic. This is the original film footage from 1970 that first reported these attacks.
Satan, get ye behind me and be gone from this place forever. I am the Right Reverend Sean Manchester, Bishop of Glastonbury and Autocephalous, or Catholic jurisdiction, and Primate for Ecclesia Apostolica Jesu Christi. I speak on behalf of traditional Christians everywhere. I absolutely believe in the existence of vampires. There's no question or doubt in my mind. It's part of my theology, because if I'm to believe in angels, I must believe in fallen angels, and these are called demons. And if I believe in the supernatural, and I do, and if I believe in what the Bible teaches, which I do, then to believe in vampires is just a small part of that.
In 1969, Bishop Manchester discovered startling evidence of vampire attacks in Highgate Cemetery.
As far as we know, it has only physically attacked one male person who has passed by the gate, but there are others who amply attest to have been visited by it in their beds at night.
One of these victims was Elizabeth Vaudewa.
Myself and a girlfriend. And we were walking down, and we established that this was the time we both saw, where there was a graveyard in front of you, and the graves were opening up, and people were rising.
Elizabeth's boyfriend at the time, Keith McLean, began noticing changes in her.
There was an exorcist moment, and I was lying in bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and a very deep voice, almost a male voice, came out of her mouth saying, "I'm going to bring both of you down." So I was doing a lot of praying.
One day I woke up, and I went downstairs. There was 2 lumps on my neck. They weren't lumps, they were like pinholes.
I hadn't included the possibility of it being a vampire because I hadn't even thought of that or realised the existence of vampires. But then, when Bishop Manchester spoke to me and explained about the legions of the undead, thereafter everything fitted and totally made sense. I believe it was a vampire, yes. I don't have any doubt about that.
To save Elizabeth from certain death, Bishop Manchester and Keith McLean claimed to have performed rituals to rid her of this fiendish vampire, and very quickly the night visitation stopped, and Elizabeth made a full recovery. The hunt was now on for the resting place of the Highgate vampire.
It was finally tracked down to the bowels of a neo-Gothic derelict mansion on the borders of Highgate, where, after much drama, we dragged the contents of the casket out to the rear of the garden and cremated all therein. And that was indeed the last of the primary source of the vampire contagion at Highgate Cemetery at the beginning of 1974. The vampire is the antithesis of life. It is a disgusting and filthy parody of the redeeming blood of Christ. It can only bring death, misery, and worse, the contamination of the soul.
I can find no record of a real body being exhumed from the mansion that Bishop Manchester talks of. Yet, he clearly believes he's killed a vampire. How outlandish is such a belief? How can the allure of the supernatural have survived beyond the Middle Ages? At some level, are we all still open to such beliefs?
Feel free,
Tonight, I'm going to take part in an experiment that reveals just how susceptible we are to the existence of the supernatural. To do this, I've joined psychologist Richard Wiseman, who is going to perform a séance. Richard has come up with a credible scenario. He's told the group we will be trying to contact the spirit of George Hartman, a fictional character connected to the Highgate vampire.
Paranormal activity, people feeling very odd, a sense of presence. Contact the spirit of George Hartman.
Is it possible to persuade us, this group of randomly selected people, to believe in forces beyond our understanding? Before the séance began, I met Richard in the bar for a quick chat.
So Richard, you do this quite often?
I have done many of these, yes, and each time very, very different.
Are you don't channel, or you're not?
No, I mean, it's got to be said, I'm pretty sceptical about this stuff. I mean, having led many, many groups through it and seen the same kind of effects, I think a lot of this is psychological. We either believe or we don't, and we create or not vampires in our world because of those beliefs. George, are you there? We're looking for a yes or indeed a no. We're looking to ask George whether he's there. We're looking for a yes or a no. We're looking for a movement to that answer. And then the glass coming to rest.
Have the beliefs of this group been challenged?
I'm not sure what I think at all. It's not uncomfortable. I mean, I didn't think that was going to move, to be honest. At the beginning, I didn't think that.
So you're surprised when it did?
Yeah.
I like having answers to things, and there's no conclusive answer. No one can say how that happened. Just then, I don't think anyone can explain what happened. So.
This is an incredibly compelling event. Everybody wants to join in. Everyone has an opinion about it. And I think that's an exact parallel with the vampires. The notion of life after death, and there's evidence, and it's going to come back. And of course it may well be negative and evil. I think these are compelling psychological ideas.
So tonight, we all experienced an extraordinary thing. And yet we all walked away with different perceptions about what had happened. We saw what we wanted to see, and we believed in what we wanted to believe. Belief can be a very powerful thing. Which brings me back to the story that began my journey, and the desecration of a grave that shocked the world. And to get to the bottom of that extraordinary event, I shall need to go back to Romania, to a small village where a group of peasants one moonlit night descended on a graveyard, armed with pitchforks and the belief that they needed to rid themselves of a vampire. I'm back in Romania, in Marotinul de Sus, where this story all began with that chilling report of the desecrated grave. Marotinul is like many villages in Romania, living in the 21st century, but steeped in ancient beliefs that for many are still all too real. I'm with a journalist, Marina Andronache, who first uncovered the story. What compelled the villagers to undertake such a macabre act?
We want to know if people here really believe in vampires. People here believe in it, otherwise they wouldn't always talk about them. Do you have any people in your family who did such things? I have heard the elders talking about real vampires, but there haven't been cases in my family.
And this is the cemetery where it all happened. It seems peaceful enough now, but only a few months ago the picture was very different.
Oh my God, the brain is full of blood. It's vampire blood.
Do you believe in such things, vampires?
Of course.
Really?
Yeah. As an actor, you kind of have to believe in whatever you're...
Yes, it's important.
And this is the grave?
Yes, this is a grave. This is the place where the relatives of the dead man came in the middle of the night to practice, to perform.
With Marina's help, I've gained an exclusive interview with the daughter of the suspected vampire. She won't talk directly on camera for fear of reprisals.
It's awful what they have done. I have never seen anything like this. Never in my life.
Look, this is the pitchfork I used. Film it.
They took him out of the coffin and cut him up from here to here.
His hands were down by his body and there was blood all around the mouth.
They took out his heart and burned it at the crossroads. They gave the ashes to the old sick woman who drank the burnt heart and got better. But we'll have to see. My father was never a vampire and never will be.
How do the villagers feel about all of this now?
When I ask them if they will do again this kind of ritual, they answered very...
Definitely?
Definitely, yes.
My journey began with the unreal world of smooth-talking Hollywood vampires. It's ended here with this horror story. A story that's all too real. And what happens when our darkest fears and fantasies are unleashed. As ever, the real world is a lot scarier than the world of fiction. And for these people, as for many in the world, the evil of vampires is very present and very, very real.